Welcome along to the latest episode of True to Form, and this week is a proper episode. We're looking at this weekend's Dublin Racing Festival, a look back on Cheltenham Trials Day, and your favourite performances from the last 7 days reviewed. This is True to Form. The first section of the show is from the audience, and this week's question I put out to you on Twitter was looking for your favourite performances over the last 7 days in relation to the Cheltenham Festival. Had plenty of responses on Twitter and TikTok, so if you want to get involved in the upcoming episodes of True to Form, make sure to follow me on all the social medias and put your questions and comments in for the video. This week we have 4 to review in this section, and there's plenty to talk about from Trials Day, starting with one from Stephen Kelly Robbins on TikTok, and he said the new line, the thing I took away is he needs further. To me, that was nothing to get excited about. Beating Brentford Hope by a length and a half, no chance in a champion hurdle unless it's the poorest we've seen in some time. Now, I suppose if you look at it on paper, yeah, the new line only beating the mean line and Brentford Hope by length and a half and a nose is not really formed to be winning a champion hurdle. And I suppose the race was, at the time it was hard to really take on what you're looking at because of what was happening to Sir Gino. We didn't know at the time, and thankfully sort of all is okay as such. He's on the recovery now. But looking at it from a distance and looking at it in review, I was actually more impressed by the new line than probably I was at the time. They went an absolute crawl around the race, and I'm not sure that the lack of Sir Gino would have helped Harry Skelton and what he's trying to do through the race. He sort of had to pick the new line up and carry him over the line, and he got the last a little bit wrong in my eyes as well. I know this whole thing about his jumping is maybe sort of a small question mark, having fallen at Newcastle, and the whole point of this run was to try and get a clear round with him. Well, they got a clear round. It was a great preparation, I thought, for the champion hurdle. And he showed that he's definitely got the speed for a champion hurdle. I don't think you could be walking away from that going, he's a slow horse. Is he value for the champion hurdle? I don't think so, but I think that's fairly obvious. Is he a potential champion hurdle winner? I'd say yes. I don't think there's many negatives towards the new line. He's got the speed, he likes the track, pretty versatile in what you can do with him in the race, and his jumping seems to be getting better. So to me, I know what you're seeing there, Stephen, but I thought the new line was actually more impressive than people were giving him credit for in the Unibet hurdle on Trials Day. Next one, and quite a short and sweet one from Matt on TikTok. I really like the look of Cryptic Jim still. Now, obviously the last race at Cheltenham was what it was. Don't want to be talking about the old pedantics behind it, but I thought the actual race itself, you look at Cryptic Jim and Taurus Bay, I thought they were both really impressive. Taurus Bay stepping up in trip for the first time. He's also trying that really testing ground, which is what it was. And I suppose you look at it, Taurus Bay being beaten by a big price horse in Cryptic Jim, maybe you can have one look at that and go, not sure. But for me, 2 really nice horses. And if you want to look at some form, the third horse, Fortune Timmy, was nearly 5 lengths behind Old Park Star at Kempton. So if Old Park Star is the supreme favourite, I think this form has to be given some credit, and maybe there was some disappointments in the race, but Cryptic Jim and Taurus Bay did everything right. And Taurus Bay is a lovely horse. I think he's a real nice, smart one. He's a 5-year-old. He's improving nicely. So for Cryptic Jim to sort of be eyeballed by him as such really at the last and still stay ahead of him at the line, I think 2 really nice performances. What do you do with them? I suppose you could both have a go at Cheltenham and see what happens, but they're raced 135 for Cryptic Jim and 134 for Taurus Bay. They could definitely be handicapping either this season at Aintree or maybe as a handicap chaser next season. 2 nice horses. I agree with you there, Matt. The next one, but a bit of a long one here from Josh Burson on TikTok. Leader Dallier hopped on at 50s. Really impressed by what he did, which some people may probably disagree with as he beat no one. Beat Straight John by 9 lengths on the bridle, where it beat Straight John last time heavily off the bridle by 4 lengths. Massive improver. Not saying it's a supreme winner, but it's an improving horse I fancy at a good price. Now, well on Josh for getting 50s. I don't think he's 50s anymore. I think he's something like 20-1 for the Supreme. Is he the Supreme winner? I think it's hard to say that based on one win there and having finished second to Ballyfad on his hurdling debut for Willie Mullins. However, he was very impressive. He almost looked like a horse who wasn't running on heavy ground. He did everything so easily. He travelled nicely into the race. He jumped well. Even when he was getting slightly headed around the bend, he just went away again like a really nice horse. I was really impressed by Leader Dallier. Now, I do think he could potentially be a horse to run in Grade 1s either this season or next, but I wouldn't say he's an absolute certainty for Supreme or anything. However, he's definitely got his chance, and I wouldn't mind him even going up in trip to the Turners potentially. Depends what Willie Mullins is going to be doing. I do think this gives a nice nod to Ballyfad, and obviously we're going to hopefully see Ballyfad at the Dublin Racing Festival this weekend. Ballyfad kicked him away nicely at Christmas, and I know maybe Leader Dallier needed it for his first run under Willie Mullins. However, it's a nice form boost, and I think both horses could be quite nice, and there's just something in the back of my mind which suggesting that Ballyfad is a proper horse. So it'd be good to see if that's the case in the DRF this weekend in what looks like a very nice 2-mile Grade 1 novice hurdle. And yeah, Leader Dallier, Nice horse. I do agree with you there, Josh. And the final one for this section, Maestro Conti could be a good bet at 7s, and that was another one posted on TikTok. Obviously won the Triumph Trial at Cheltenham on the weekend. 7-1 for the Triumph. I'm not so sure. He was good, and maybe he could be one that's improving nicely. However, he took a bit of time to get up the rail, I thought, and he beat One Horse Town by something like a couple of lengths. And if you want to compare some nice form with him, Manella Study beat One Horse Town quite comfortably in the other Triumph Trial we saw early in the season. And you've now got Maestro Conti at 7-1, and you've got Manella Study, or just with connections and Adam Nicol and stuff, a much bigger price at 14 for the Triumph. I thought Manella Study did it a lot better than what Maestro Conti did on the weekend as well. I actually think the form of his race is stronger as well. He beat Winston Jr., who to me looks like a player in the Fred Winter, even with his revised mark of 131. I still think he'd be a massive player in that race, and Winston Jr.'s gone bolstered up since. And Manella Study just, I think, looked a lot better than what Maestro Conti did on the weekend. Is Maestro Conti a nice horse? Of course he is. There's no doubting that. He stuck to the task nicely. He probably just stay further than 2 miles, and that's kind of what you need for the Triumph. However, if I was on a bet in the Triumph right now and I was looking at the British contenders, I'd probably be looking towards Adam Nichol's Manella Study rather than Dan Skelton's Maestro Conti. Nice horse, wouldn't be for me in the Triumph Trial, but those are your opinions in from the audience. Thank you very much for getting your opinions in there. We now move on to names to note, the regular schedule of True to Form. And this week I only have the one horse to highlight, but I think it's a horse that Basher Watts and the Basher Watts Racing Syndicate could have quite a nice one on their hands. It's wondering why. He won nicely at Lingfield last week, and I've always quite impressed with what he did. And obviously he had some interesting form coming into the race, having finished second to Ambiente Friendly, a long gone second in the Derby from a couple of years ago. And he actually ran recently and was a bit disappointing subsequently, so I suppose the form took a knock there. But I thought everything that Wondering Why did was quite impressive at Lingfield. Travelled nicely, jumped brilliantly, went away from the last like a nice horse, and there was no real doubts in the mind of me anyway watching the race that he was going to get beaten. I suppose the question is, what do you do with the horse? And I was a bit sad to go for his form and realise he's not EBF final qualified, the race at Sandown, because Ben Pauling has a good record in the race. He had the 1-2 a couple of years ago, and off a mark of 119, which is what Wondering Why has as his handicap mark. I thought that'd be very attractive, and the handicapper only gave him £1 for this Lingfield win, but he's not EBF qualified yet. Is there any more EBF qualifiers coming up before the race, and I think in early March? I don't know, potentially. Are they going to want to run him that quickly to then go to that race? Probably not so, but he is a nice horse, I do think. He's rated 119. I do think there's an improvement of his handicap mark. I think the main thing for the horse really is that he's going to be a lovely chaser. He's almost a bit like Mambo number 5 in the fact he looks like a nice frame of a horse, and I'm only comparing with Mambo number 5 because that's another Ben Pauling horse who looked like a chaser even when he was a juvenile hurdler. I do think Wondering Why looks like a chaser, and he'd be a lovely chaser next season, touch wood, and yeah, I think he's quite a nice horse. So, Basher, you've got a nice horse in your hands, and that's Wondering Why as this week's name to note. Moving on to the eye catcher section now. Worryingly for viewers at home, I do apologise. There was no real eye catcher so far from Cheltenham Trials Day. I kind of think we covered most of it in the questions, and like the likes of Grey Dawning, that was sort of obvious that he was having one eye towards the Gold Cup and everything. And I don't really think there was too many eye catchers elsewhere. Like I suppose Quebecois could be going to the Ultima if they get another run in for him. He was second in the opener. However, there was one away from Cheltenham which I thought was quite nice, and just one to highlight from Huntington earlier in the week. That was Ace of Spades beating One Way West in the Patems qualifier. I think two really nice horses here, and Ace of Spades is quite interesting. Now he has the form line with Machantou. Machantou has now come out and won a Cleve Hurdle. I think he's now rated 154, and that was a nice race on New Year's Day that Ace of Spades gave to Machantou, and obviously Machantou got the better in the end, but I think it's a nice piece of form to follow. And the second from this day at Huntington, One Way West, again a horse who looked like potentially going to win at Kempton before falling at the last, and two nice horses scooting past there. But I think these two horses, Ace of Spades and One Way West, are very much on the short list for the Patems already. It's not a race that I'd like to get stuck in very early in the year, but it's a horse. It's these two horses who are improving at nice rates. I think there will be nicer chasers next season. And Ace of Spades now rated 139, One Way West rated 129. I think they're two very nice handicap marks to potentially go to the Patems with a live charge. They're nice horses. Ace of Spades has Cheltenham form as well. So those are my two horses for the Patems shortlist already, and those are my two eye catchers from this week. Now on to proceed with caution. Just the one horse to add to this list, and this might be quite a controversial one, but it's actually one that someone agrees with me on the questions that we had in for this week. We had one in from David Whittington on TikTok. He said, I don't think Love Signed Danu's performance was that great. Looked a bit of a plodder. Surely some speedier types amongst the bumper market. That's the champion bumper, of course. Also on Maestro Conti at 20s for the triumph on the back of Josh's comments for LTR, but not so sure on that horse either. Shock, Josh Stacey putting people away. No, he's definitely got a chance with the price there. But Love Signed Danu is a horse, I kind of agree with you there, David, on maybe a horse that I'm not overly sold on. And that can be a bit harsh on the horse because ultimately only had the one run so far as a run in a bumper that was entitled to win. So there could be any sorts of improvement. And, you know, I could be saying this now and he could go and win the champion bumper in the Supreme next season. However, I kind of agreed with you in the fact I did think he was a bit of a plodder. And it wasn't a great race, I don't think. I mean, like he beat the second by 20 plus lengths and he was on heavy ground and just had the run of the race all the way. And he almost like fell in front rather than sort of going away like a really, really smart horse. I suppose it's hard to look visually impressive on ground like that. However, like when you're looking at a horse at champion bumper, he's 7-1 market favourite now. Like I would have liked to see a horse at that price in the market done a bit more potentially, or just maybe shown a bit more speed or something like that, maybe had a couple more runs. With Love Signed Danu, like, are they going to run once more for the champion bumper? No, I mean, that's fairly confident to say that. And he's now going to be going off probably quite short for the champion bumper. I think maybe the market will tell in the week leading up to the champion bumper whether this is this, you know, potential champion bumper winner in the making. However, I do think there are more impressive performances that I've seen in the champion bumper ranks anyway. So he's just one that I'm slightly curious on. And I mentioned there was one horse for perceived caution this week. I'm going to add another, but he didn't run in the last week. But just because his handicap mark was given as we record today on Tuesday, and it's made people on Twitter get very excited by the horse. Jericho de Repine was dropped £3 by the handicapper for his run at Windsor to a mark of 145, which means if they went straight to the Kinmure now, he'd get a run in the race. Seems like he's going to be carrying the weight of not only top weight in the Kinmure, but also all of racing Twitter because they seem to fancy him. He's got a chance. Obviously, you look at some performances from last season. He won that nice handicap hurdle at Punchtown at the end of the year, second in the Thames. I suppose on those bits of form, he's got a chance. Just as a chaser, I've never really been sold by him. He was very disappointing on his first chasing start, you know, last season when he had the whole debacle about saddling and everything at Kempton. And this year, like, has he looked to me like a horse who's well handicapped of 145 over fences? No. He's looked like a horse who's getting round, doing nicely. Maybe he's been given some conservative rides. Maybe they've had one eye on the spring. Maybe he'll be better for better ground. Fine, I agree with those points. But is he this absolute shoo-in for the Kinmure of 145? I don't think so. If you're on at the nice prices, lovely position to be in. He's got his chance. But for me, is he the Kinmure winner? Is he this plot horse that's been going towards the Kinmure all year? I don't know. I'm yet to be convinced. But we'll see. It is JP, so who knows? Who knows? But those are two horses then to proceed with caution this week. Finally, a look ahead, and this week it's the Dublin Racing Festival. Now, as I'm recording, I hope we're on for the Dublin Racing Festival. I think parts of the track are waterlogged, but Leopardstown does train very well, so it's pretty likely that racing's going to be on this weekend. I had a look through the cars, and I do think, before I mention these horses, there has to be a small caveat in the fact it will be quite heavy ground. It's hard to really be so confident on horses who have been racing on nicer ground all season, potentially might like that nicer ground. And, you know, we don't know what's going to be going through races because it's still early entries and horses may be pulled out if it is too heavy. The first one for me is actually in the opening race at Nathaniel Lacey at 1:15 at Leopardstown on Saturday, Dr. Steinberg. Now, if you're watching last week's video, you see me put Dr. Steinberg up for the Albert Bartlett about 16-1, 14-1. Since then, the Devil You Know has won the River Don, and he's now 10-1 for the Albert Bartlett is Dr. Steinberg. Nothing's changed in that time, other than the fact that the Devil You Know has come out and won. However, if I think he's the Albert Bartlett winner, or potential Albert Bartlett winner, he should be putting this race away. 2 miles 6, I think that's a nice stepping stone to go on to potentially the Albert Bartlett over 3 miles. He won on soft enough conditions last time out. He did it nicely, beating the Devil You Know. The form's there. He's shorter than he was last week. I think genuinely last week he was like 4-1 for this race when we didn't know if Dr. Dumaniel was going to the race or not. Now he's 5-4. He's short, sorry, but I do think Dr. Steinberg should hopefully win the Nathaniel Lacey on Saturday. And the Sunday we go on to some good action on the final day of the Dublin Racing Festival. Irish Champion Hurdle for me. It's Bryce Days Ahead. I think this is her day, potentially. She obviously won very impressively at Christmas a couple of years ago now. That performance still lingers in my mind. The way she just put that race to bed so easily. And yes, she has formed to reverse a lossy mouth from Christmas this year. However, it's her first run of the season. I think she needed it, and the way she sort of idled up towards Lossiemouth and then maybe didn't find enough to go past suggested to me that fitness was the thing that got her beat. I actually think softer ground will be fine for her as well. She comes from a pedigree with, you know, Mighty Potter and Caldwell Potter that suggests that softer ground should be no issue. She's also won on soft ground before. She's very ground versatile. I think this is her day, and if Bright Days Ahead is going to win another Grade 1, hopefully it's at the DRF this week, so I'll be backing her in the Irish Champion hurdle. And in the final race of the day, I'm going for another bumper. I think I've had a knock on the head in the night, but Maximilian Lady in the Mayor's bumper, the Grade 2, recently purchased by Willie Mullins, so again, another Mullins in the bumper for me, but I've been really impressed by her so far this season. She was nice last time out when finishing second to one of Willie Mullins' horse, started up nicely, looked like the winner, just the Mullins horse went by there, but won impressively at Galway in September, hasn't really produced much that race, that'd be a small question mark, and then ran behind Blue Waters at Ballinrobe in August. Blue Waters since come out and won a maiden hurdle. I just think that she has a nice chance, and she's maybe not an each way price anymore. She's about 9-2, but I think in a race that's open enough now, she's looked very impressive in 3 bumper starts so far this year, and I'll be happy to back Maximilian Lady in the Mayor's bumper. So just to reiterate there, we're going for Dr. Steinberg and then Nathaniel Lacey, Bryce Days Ahead in the Irish Champion hurdle, and Maximilian Lady in the Mayor's bumper at the Dublin Racing Festival. But look, the DRF should be fantastic this weekend. Hope you enjoy, and those are my selections for the Dublin Racing Festival. That's all for True to Form this week. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to like and subscribe. That makes me happy every single week if we're seeing some nice views and likes coming in. If you've got any opinions or questions or opinions of what I've said, let me know very kindly in the comments or on my Twitter or on my TikTok. I'll be back, hopefully, to review the Dublin Racing Festival next week, and we're now firmly on that road to Cheltenham, so we'll be looking at the Cheltenham Festival always with one eye. But this has been True to Form.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.